Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Michelle Peterson, and I am the Training Manager for the Empire Justice Center. I'd like to note that this webinar is being presented to you today in partnership with the Center for New York City Neighborhoods and the Empire Justice Center, and is also made possible by the New York State Attorney General Homeownership Protection Program. So before we get started, just a couple of quick notes on how you can interact with us today. Everyone has entered the webinar in a listen-only mode. So if you have any questions on any of the material that's being presented during the webinar, you can enter your question using the questions pane that's located on your control panel. We'll be addressing questions both during and at the end of today's presentation. For a copy of today's materials, they can be downloaded by going to the handouts section on your control panel. If you have any issues or problems downloading a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, you can send me an email directly. I'll put my email in the chat box, and I'll be happy to forward a copy off to you. And anyone that is attending today can receive a certificate of attendance, and you can also email me your request for that, and we'll get one right out to you. Also, at the end of the webinar, you're going to be asked to complete a webinar evaluation. So if you could please take a moment to complete the evaluation, we really do appreciate that. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I am going to turn it over to Karina.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everyone. This is Karina Ulisa from the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. Welcome to our joint webinar, and thank you for attending. As scams are becoming more and more prevalent, we thought this would be a very good time to go over how to deal with scams in more detail. So today we have the pleasure of having Dina Levy, Special Assistant to the New York State Attorney General, to give us an update on what their office is doing to combat scams. So I'll have her speak first, and we'll have a chance for questions after she speaks before I introduce all the other presenters. So I'm going to turn it over to Dina now. Dina, are you there?
I am. Thank you. Hi, everybody. So I don't know who's on, but I'll just say thanks, everybody, for joining. I know that lately scams and what started as mortgage rescue scams and now has turned into sort of that plus a big trend around deed theft has become a big issue for this network. We know that the anchors are working closely with all of you on what to do about it. I wanted to share a little bit about what our office is thinking, recognizing that, this is becoming a really significant challenge. And so there are a couple things that we have in the works and then a couple of things that I think are a little longer term. I'll just quickly talk about what we've done so far and what we're hoping to do in the near future. So the first, and I'm sure by now everybody knows well about this, is we created a web-based app called AG Scam Help. It's agscamhelp.com. And the intention really of that tool was to both become a centerpiece for consumers to go if they're facing foreclosure or if they think they may be subject to a scam or if they've been approached by a third party who's offering services. The site allows consumers to vet the company that they're being, or the individual that's approaching them, and from that search they will get information back as to whether or not that entity is a government-approved entity. So that would mean either that they are supported under the HOPP program or that they are a HUD-approved housing counseling agency. If the person they're searching or the entity they're searching is not a government-approved entity, they will get, what we hope is a strong warning and an urging message to actually connect themselves to the HOPP network, which they can also do on the site by just putting in their zip code and hopefully find the person nearest to them. And the last thing the site can do is allows consumers, if they think they've already been subject or victim to a scam, they have the ability to put in a complaint that comes directly to our consumer protection unit, and they can submit that online. So I should say, we recognize that the app is not a panacea. It's just it's an educational tool, again, intended to drive people away from scams and to the HOPP network. It has been fairly successful in terms of usage, and that's in large measure due to the investment we've made in advertising the site in very strategic areas. So the center has actually been running that aspect of our work and has been very effective at making targeted ads through Facebook, through Google ads, through Pandora, through, we had bus ads running in Long Island. So as we identify where the hot spots for scams are, we try and very strategically target the advertising for AG Scam Help to those neighborhoods. I think we're now over 130,000 users since the site went up, which is good, but certainly, again, not catching everybody who needs to know. So the last thing I'll say, just because the center reminded me, is we recognize the site took a while to build and we had to get it past a bunch of lawyers. No offense to the lawyers on the call, but there's a lot of sensitivity about what we could say. So we are now going through a revamp of the site to make it both hopefully more user-friendly and a little bit more attractive. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll probably have a launch of the new sort of 2.0 version of the site. It will do the same things function-wise. It will just hopefully be a little bit more easy to navigate. So that's the first thing. The second thing we're now starting to think about is we have been able to gather quite a bit of information about complaints from homeowners who've been scammed in New York, say, over the last, I think, 5 years. We've partnered with the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights to get their data, which has identified about 3,000 families that have been, or at least those are the families who have complained about scams over the last couple of years. And so using that information, we have also partnered with some technology folks who are helping us to build what we're calling a predictive model. And so the goal of this is to sort of identify at a very granular level, and potentially even at an address level, where we think homeowners are likely to be targeted for scams. And the goal there obviously is so once we know that, we can be extremely thoughtful and targeted in our outreach. And that would be both the AG Scam Help advertising outreach, but also some additional outreach initiatives that we're considering launching through this office to make sure we're getting to people as early in the process as possible and hopefully before they actually get scammed. That is a little bit still in the works, but as that gets more clear and as the model gets built, we will be back in touch with the HOPP network to talk about where we've identified the hotspots and how we're going to facilitate the outreach agenda and the outreach efforts. The last thing I'll say is, particularly as the deed theft problem has become the new face of this issue, I would say our Consumer Protection Bureau here has always been very active in this space and has, brought a lot of cases, civil cases, Home Affordable Direct and Lipton Law and others, which has been somewhat effective, though I'd say as we're starting to look at the deed theft issue, there's also the potential that these activities may actually become like a criminal investigation for us. So there is a fair amount of resources that have been dedicated through our criminal division and our civil divisions to start really trying to take on as many of these cases as we can. We have, at the present, I think, 4 very active investigations, 2 of which are criminal in nature. We don't have endless capacity, but we do want to know if there are big-time repeat offenders out there that make sense for us, as well as potentially other law enforcement agencies who are also trying to coordinate better with to take on those cases. So to that end, I would urge the network, if you are finding these cases, and particularly if you know that they are happening in more than one instance, in other words, repeat offenders, this is information our office wants and needs to get as quickly as you learn it. So if you're running into this, you can just send me an email. You can go through Empire Justice or through the center. But the faster we know where there is a big operation, the faster we can launch an investigation. So I think with that, I will stop there and see if there are any other questions.
Thank you, Dina. I'm going to give everyone a minute here to type out those questions in the question box, and if there are any, I will read them out to you, Dina. Okay, so far actually there are no questions, so I think we are good. And if there are any additional questions, feel free to route them to Empire Justice Center or the Center for New York City Neighborhoods, and we can get that to Dina as well. Thank you so much, Dina.
You're welcome.
And to get to the meat of our presentation, what I'd like to do is also introduce Jennifer Eisenberg and Jacqueline Griffin, both from Brooklyn Legal Services. And what they'll be doing is they're covering the types of scams affecting homeowners and how to address them, spot them, and deal with them. So I'm going to turn this over to Jackie now. Jackie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Thanks, Karina. So we're just going to jump right into it. Today we're going to be talking about deed theft and other types of mortgage assistance or foreclosure rescue scams. I want to pause here because what I don't want to do is create a false dichotomy between deed theft and other types of scams. What we're mostly talking about with deed theft is a foreclosure or a mortgage assistance scam that actually ends up in someone losing their home through theft of the deed. So they're really all very closely related, but we're going to talk about them separately because that's just a little more workable. What are the stakes here? Of course, the most obvious one is that a homeowner is at risk of losing their home. And this may be true whether they receive assistance or not. Civil litigation is a lengthy process. Courts, some of the statutes that we're using are not quite tested in this way. It's a matter of educating the judges. So it can be a lengthy process, and even with criminal prosecution, which is great to hear that that's being pursued, but even with criminal prosecution, there's never really a guarantee of restitution for the victims. So there's a lot at stake here in terms of risk of actually losing your home, even in the event that a homeowner is able to find assistance after being victimized. They can also lose equity in their home. So whatever the difference between the amount that is owed on the loan and the amount that their house is worth, they risk losing that. Even so, for instance, a homeowner that's not in a position to stay in their home, who is a victim of deed theft, loses the opportunity to sell that home at a profit and have those profits in their pocket as they try to figure out how to move forward with their lives. Thousands of dollars being paid to these scammers is also a huge risk. Most homeowners are going to be in a better position to get a loan modification or to figure out the next step of their life if they are saving that money. Loss of time is actually probably the most important if you're talking about someone who has the ability to actually save their home, because as time passes, interest is accruing and it becomes harder and harder to actually get a loan modification or to work out some other home saving solution. This is a chart essentially showing what I think we all probably know, is that these types of scams have a greater effect on minorities, people of color. And just in terms of New York itself, we report larger losses as a state than the rest of the country. On average, homeowners are losing about $900 more than the nationwide average. So we're really here in New York in the thick of it. So today we're obviously going to talk about what you guys can do to help people that you find in these positions. Identify the victims of the scam. Sometimes people don't know if they've been scammed, and it's up to us to kind of root that out and tell them. Directing the homeowner to seek the appropriate assistance. Reporting the scammers, just as Dina was just talking about, reporting the scammers to the Attorney General, so that they can also be aware and potentially start an investigation and pursue criminal prosecution or even civil remedies. Assisting legal advocates in documenting the scams for litigation, so keeping those, taking copies and scans of those papers that the homeowner brings in at the first instance, that can be very important. And also outreach is very important. The AG has a lot of materials that they've developed around their scam help website, and it's important for us to, I think they've been sending them to all of us, so we should all be disseminating those to the extent that we can as widely as possible. And that's an example of some of the materials that you'll see. So deed theft scams, what do those look like?
Sorry, Jackie, if I can just interject. We have one question here.
Sure.
So one question that we have is, why are people of color being targeted the most? And I can perhaps partially answer that. It's usually because even when you're accounting for income, and a lot of this is in our scam report, they were disproportionately targeted for subprime loans to begin with and other forms of loans that were more predatory and more likely to lead to foreclosure. So that's one of the main reasons. I don't know, Jackie, if you have any other input to say?
Sure. In terms of scams, and this may be something that we discuss in more detail later, but in terms of scams, a lot of them are based on race and national origin. So a lot of scammers, as sad as it is to say, try to scam their own people. They reach out to people who speak their same language, who are from their same country, who practice their same religion, and they try to develop those personal relationships in order to get people in order to victimize people. So I think that's the problem, is that they use those cultural connections to find people that are particularly vulnerable.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Okay. So what is deed theft? It's basically any person using deception or fraud in order to gain title to someone else's property. This can be done by forgery, actually forging someone's signature. It can be done by superimposition of signatures from one document to another. So in the case where a homeowner is asked to sign a blank document, and they do, and that signature on that document is transferred to other documents, including a deed. What's very popular now and what we're seeing a lot in our office is short sale agreements, short sales with agreements to reconvey the property back to the homeowner. So it's, and we'll go into further detail, but it's someone contacting the homeowner to say, you can get out of this foreclosure, you can get out of this mortgage default by short selling your home. And once you've done that, we will give the home back to you and get you into an affordable mortgage. That's something that we're seeing a lot of these days. So how do they find people? Foreclosures are public. It's not really difficult to look at court records to see who's been in foreclosure for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Those people are easy victims. Also, after a judgment of foreclosure and sale has been entered and the house is up for auction, that's also public information, and they can find that out and seek out those homeowners. They can also look at public records to determine who is behind on their water, who is behind on their property taxes, who has violations on the home that have accrued over the years. So those are all of the methods that they will look to find people, and the people that have long-term foreclosures, the people that are up for auction, the people that have not paid their water for a number of years, or have liens from property taxes. These are the types of people that are most vulnerable, and these are the people that the scammers are looking for. They will use shell corporations to do this operation, and the effect of that is that if a limited liability corporation or an LLC is purchasing a property, it's not always easy to determine who the actual person purchasing the property is, who the person is behind the LLC, who the members of that company are. So by using an LLC and by transferring the money to different LLCs, they are able to remain anonymous, which makes them harder to find and harder to prosecute in either a criminal or a civil context. They will use fake addresses. It's, you know, the address will be a blank lot, or it's just not, you're not able to find it. Sometimes they don't provide contact information, so you can't reach them on the phone. They have to come to you. One relatively new development in this area is that New York State now does require LLC members to be disclosed when deeds are transferred. That's mostly for tax purposes, so that they can have the transaction taxed. But there has been some forward movement so that the owners of the LLCs are not able to shield themselves completely. In terms of red flags, what we're looking for is any sort of direct solicitation. So solicitations coming in the mail, phone calls to a homeowner, people coming to the house that have not been invited to the house, showing up and knocking on the door, offering help. Anyone who is offering money. There's really no reason that anyone should be giving you money if you're in foreclosure. That's a huge clue that something is wrong. If the person offers to provide the homeowner with an attorney, that's a huge red flag, because a homeowner needs someone that is representing their interests, and to the extent that someone is offering to provide you with an attorney, that attorney is more than likely representing the interests of the scammer. After we talked about this before, but asking a homeowner to sign blank documents, that's a huge red flag. Claiming that a deed transfer will be temporary, so, you know, transfer your house to me, I'll give it back to you in 90 days, and I'll give you a mortgage. That is a very, very common thing that we're seeing these days, and it's very concerning. Deed transfers with little or no consideration. So consideration is money paid. So if someone is asking a homeowner to transfer their home and they're not offering a market value price, they're just asking them to put it in their name for a period of time, that is a huge red flag. A common thing that we're seeing these days is the scammer offering to drive the homeowner from their home to the office. This might be appealing to elderly homeowners with limited mobility. It's a service that they're offering to make it seem like they are benevolent, and it's not to be trusted. Any attempt to isolate an elderly homeowner from their family members. So in the case where a homeowner says, oh, you know, my daughter has power of attorney, or I'd like my son who's a lawyer or who works at a bank to look over these documents, and that person is being discouraged from contacting those family members, that is also a red flag. This is a list of known or suspected deed thieves. I think we have to include suspected because some of them haven't been convicted yet. You don't have to memorize this. You can get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, but Launch Development, Homeowner Assistance Services of New York, My House is a Dump, Lincoln Holdings, Arash Nogre, Mario Alvarenga, Amir Miri. Those are names that should not be trusted under any circumstances. We're going to go into a little bit more detail later about best practices, but one way to start is just to check ACRIS to determine who the owner of the house is. Deeds don't have a lot of power unless they're recorded, so even a scammer has to publicly record their ownership of the home. And so that's going to be the most obvious thing, is that the person who comes to your office for assistance is not the owner of the house. They're not listed on the last deed. They're shown as having transferred their interest to another entity. It also might be helpful to do a search of the entity that the homeowner is working with or that they've engaged to help them. Google Map the address to see if it's a place that actually exists. Is there an office there? Is there a sign there? Call the phone number to see if anyone answers the phone. Those are all good ways to sort of just begin investigating whether someone might be the victim of a deed theft scam. Does anyone have any questions about deed theft before we move on?
I'm going to give it a second here. I think we have one comment / question, so I'll just read it out loud here. This morning, the person whose question is, she had a client ask me a phone number and whom to contact to inquire about getting ripped off by an attorney. He did not give specific details, but said that he had lost a lot of money in paying this attorney. Sounds very suspicious. Do you have any resources or a number that perhaps these people can contact?
Well, if it's an attorney that they're working with, I would say that the best place to start is a complaint against the attorney. We as attorneys have ethical obligations, and so we are subject to the court's discipline when we violate those. So I think it's probably Googleable, just attorney complaint New York State, and I think it's something that you can probably do online, but that's the best place to start, is to just complain against the attorney, and there may be proceedings that are started against that attorney.
And this complaint can be made by, let's say, through a local bar association?
Yes.
Thanks. That's all the question I have for now.
Okay. So mortgage assistance scams can take a number of forms. Most likely what you're going to see is a company that's charging an exorbitant amount of money to help a homeowner either defend their foreclosure case, modify their mortgage, or negotiate with a lender. The crux of it is that they usually tend to make a lot of promises about what they can achieve on behalf of the homeowner, but most of the time those promises are never delivered. So just a couple of common examples: sham lawsuits, securitization or forensic mortgage audits, or modifications or refinances. So a sham lawsuit is basically a lawyer who agrees to file a lawsuit based on a bank's predatory lending practices. They may require the homeowner to enter into a fee agreement. I've seen it a lot where they have required a homeowner to do a direct debit arrangement to pay those fees. And the lawyer agrees to bring some type of lawsuit. So not to badmouth lawyers, there are a lot of really good lawyers doing really great work around these issues, but as a homeowner, you need to be wary. You need to have specific information about what the claims are that the attorney is bringing, because a general claim that a lender acted in a predatory manner is not going to be successful. So those types of vague promises from a lawyer claiming that they're going to file a lawsuit, asking you to immediately enter into a fee agreement where you pay them monthly, that's probably a scam. Securitization or forensic mortgage audits, I think most of my clients have received some sort of offer in the mail to participate in one of these. It's basically a company that agrees to research your case, identify violations that will pressure the lender into negotiating a modification or some other solution to the problem. The truth is that a lot of what they find is very minor, and that there can't be anything done about it unless the person has a lawyer to represent them and to file a lawsuit. And none of these securitization or forensic auditors are offering actual legal assistance. They're just doing research, and they're not offering to go that next step. And so you've spent a few $1,000s to just get information, which you could probably do just by going to a lawyer. So this is obviously the most common type of scam that we see, which is people promising that they will get someone a modification or refinance agreement. So it basically follows the pattern of them promising you some sort of specific relief, like a 2% interest rate or a 40-year term or a certain amount of principal reduction or principal forgiveness. None of those things are guarantees. As practitioners, we know that the type of relief that people are eligible for is entirely dependent on the type of loan that they have, who owns the loan, who the servicer is. There's no way to promise any particular outcome. So to the extent that a homeowner receives a solicitation in the mail offering a particular outcome, and those the ones that have the terms of your loan modification set out on the mailing, those are most certainly scams. There's no, as we all know, there's no specific relief that can ever be guaranteed. It's really based on the individual circumstances of the homeowner. These are some of the red flags that you may see. Anyone requiring an upfront payment is not to be trusted. Under most circumstances in New York, it is illegal for a non-attorney to charge an upfront fee for mortgage assistance. So to the extent that they are requiring hundreds or thousands of dollars as a down payment on getting assistance, that is more than likely a scam. What may happen, and what I've seen happen, is that a counselor promising a mortgage assistance will associate themselves with an attorney so that it can appear that an attorney is involved, but the attorney that's involved does not actually agree to provide any legal services. So no one is going to court to represent the homeowner. The attorney is just there so that they can try to appear that they are lawfully charging an upfront fee for their services. Again, this is an area where I do see a lot of agreements to set up direct debit. So either the law firm or the counseling agency will set up an agreement with the homeowner whereby they're taking a certain amount out of their bank account each and every month. That should never that's something that no one should ever agree to. Any organization or person that promises a particular outcome or a particular type of relief, that's a red flag. Any sort of direct solicitation, people coming to your home, people calling on the phone, mailings that you receive. In terms of agreements that homeowners enter into to receive mortgage assistance, if the person that they're working with has knowledge that they speak English as a second language, and they don't provide a copy of the contract in the homeowner's language, or they don't provide a copy that's been signed by both parties, that's also concerning. Any sort of person that asserts that they have some type of certification, so anyone who identifies as a distressed property expert or a forensic auditor is not to be trusted, and anyone who gives a homeowner very clearly erroneous advice, such as telling them not to go to court or telling them to stop paying their mortgage, telling them not to respond to legal papers. Those are signs that someone is being scammed. So those are just some examples of things that homeowners might receive in the mail. They often look very official. The vast majority of them are completely fake. This is a list of known or suspected scammers. American Hope Group, Salve Su Casa, they tend to target, as I was saying before, they will target Spanish speakers. So again, just take a look at these names, keep them on your wall, just so you'll be aware that it's a problem if your homeowner comes in with something that identifies that they're working with these people. So there are things that you can do to sort of try to figure out if someone is working with a reputable company or not. Obviously the red flags, but the AG Scam Help website does offer a feature where you can enter the name of the entity that you're working with or that the homeowner is working with, and they will tell you whether or not they've been vetted, whether or not there are complaints against that entity. That's a good way to know up front and encourage homeowners to use it to know whether the company that you're working with is actually legitimate. I like to look at eCourts or also the site where the electronically filed complaints are appearing these days, and also clerk minutes. So I can see, so if a homeowner tells me that they have an attorney, but that no one has been coming to court with them, I can look and see if that attorney has entered an appearance, if they have filed any motions or other documents in the action. Mortgage servicer records. So if a homeowner is saying that, you know, they've been submitting loan applications, sorry, mortgage modification applications through one of these companies, you can contact the servicer to see if they've actually received any of these documents. You can do this through what's called a request for information, which is just a letter essentially that says this is the information that I would like from my record, and the servicer is required to respond. They're required to give you what you ask for to the extent that it relates to your mortgage. So you can contact them and ask them, the homeowner can contact them and ask them, you know, did you get these documents that I sent to my counselor on, you know, X date? Did you get this modification application? So those are ways that you can kind of just check and see whether whether a homeowner is working with someone who's legitimate or not. This is a screenshot of the AG Scam Help website. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to specific case examples?
I don't see any questions so far, so we can move on for now.
Okay.
Okay, so hi everyone, this is Jenny Eisenberg. I'm a colleague of Jackie Griffin, and I'm also at Legal Services of New York. So I'm going to move into some of the specific cases of clients we've got in our office in Brooklyn, and just be advised, so these are just two cases that we've got, or actually it's more than two, but sort of two different sets of bad actors. And it's just examples, so it doesn't mean that every scam is going to take these forms, but we thought that these two examples kind of illustrated a lot of the red flags that we're seeing, and we as advocates have learned a lot from litigating these cases, and we've learned kind of like what are the questions to ask, you know, what are the different kinds of harm that scammers can inflict on our clients, and we've also learned just how hard it is to get relief. So the first case example that I'm going to talk about is a client of ours named Ozella Campbell. Some of you who read the Times may have seen the article that came out several months ago, I want to say maybe in November of last year, that featured a big picture of her on the front because her story is particularly sympathetic. So Ms. Campbell was in trouble on her loan. She wasn't actually in foreclosure proceedings yet, so she was in that moment that many of you advocates have caught many clients where they're in trouble but they haven't been sued yet, and they're freaking out and wondering where to go, and they don't have money for a lawyer, and they're not really sure what their options are going to be. And it was at that moment that Ms. Campbell saw a commercial on television for an outfit called MyHouseIsADump.com.
I'm sorry, Jennifer. Sorry to interrupt, but do you mind speaking up a little bit?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
Thank you.
Is this better? Hopefully this is better. So Ms. Campbell saw an advertisement on television for a company called MyHouseIsADump.com. Nice punchy name. And so she is in a stressful moment and not really having other options, decided that she should explore that, and she called the number, figuring, you know, what do I have to lose? I'll find out what they can do for me. So she called the number, and she spoke with someone on the phone at this scam outfit who obviously recognized that she was incredibly vulnerable and would basically take any help that she could get, and was at a moment when she would probably trust anyone who offered to help her. And so the person she spoke with made a whole host of promises that, as many of us can sort of imagine at the time, seemed like incredibly appealing, but of course with the benefit of distance were not realistic promises to make. So she was promised that this outfit would pay off her mortgage, that they would provide her with new housing, with a new apartment for 2 full years, rent paid, and that she would walk away from the deal with $40,000 cash in hand. As it turned out, this scammer moved Ms. Campbell into an illegal apartment, actually an unheated garage, tossed out all of her belongings, basically moved everything out of her home, put her in this unheated garage where she was then going to be living. And in fact, the scammer never satisfied her mortgage. So despite their promises to the contrary, as it turned out, they never paid off the debt. So now there is a foreclosure case. She has been sued in foreclosure. She's dispossessed from her home, so she doesn't even have her home as any leverage in the foreclosure case. And the scammer never made any of the payments that he promised that he would make. So she is in a really squalid and dangerous living condition. She is in danger of losing that, and she's facing a foreclosure case, and she doesn't have her home. All of these things obviously are incredibly traumatic, and we are doing our best to help her. But of course, the worst part about this is that she was kind of the victim of an unmediated interaction between herself and the scam outfit that came at her at a very vulnerable moment. So that's one of the cases that we are currently litigating. And I should also mention, she is an older woman. She's a Black woman with some pretty severe health problems and disabilities. So, you know, kind of as a corollary to the graphic we saw earlier, in which we were looking at the relative losses of these scams among different communities across New York State. Well, a lot of these scammers really target the most vulnerable of vulnerable communities. So it's not just targeting communities of color, it's also targeting the most vulnerable people in those communities. And our second case example is
Jennifer,
also,
I'm sorry. Before we move into the next example, did she actually pay the scammer any money as well?
No, I don't believe that she did.
Okay, that's one comfort.
One comfort, although she certainly has lost so much that, you know, in the end,
right.
Money out of hand, right? So if it's okay, I'll move on to example number 2, which, yeah, so we've actually got in our office several cases involving various permutations of bad actors, all affiliated with a company called Homeowner Assistance Services. Sounds like a very sympathetic and benevolent organization. They're not. They are the front for what is really kind of a group of shell companies that are basically, it's a real estate developer, several real estate developers. And so we've got a couple of our plaintiffs are couples, and then some are individuals. But we've got 6 different cases right now where this group targets our clients. They're vulnerable, like I said, in a number of different ways. Almost all of our clients are elderly. They are all, I want to say everyone except one is Black. And basically they all came to us, interestingly, at a moment when they were being harassed, like actually face-to-face harassed by agents of this scam outfit, or being harassed as a result of being sued for to be evicted. So in other words, they were either getting phone calls or knocks at the door, visits, having their house watched, or they got sued for eviction. And so that's kind of like what brought them through the door. Basically, the solicitations happened previous to that, and they were kind of reeled in by Homeowner Assistance Services, which is this company that says that they help people save their homes from foreclosure. And kind of using these generic promises, they would say things like, we'll help you reestablish your mortgage, we'll help you get out of debt, we'll help you save your home, you'll never have to move. You know, again, like this kind of universe of unrealistic promises being made to people. And usually they would take the form of cold calls. A lot of our clients actually got repeated cold calls on their landlines at home over the space of months. They would just get call after call after call. And finally, they would take the call either accidentally or just out of exasperation and hear the person out. Some people were physically visited in person by sales agents. They would call themselves, I think, customer relations representatives. And so people would go to our clients' homes and they would say, we know you're in trouble. We will help you save your home. And they would trick them into sharing confidential information and ultimately signing documents. And that was really the kicker for all of these cases, is that they would get our clients to sign a bunch of documents under the guise of this is part of the process of saving your home. And with those signatures, they were able to get third-party authorization to communicate with the banks that held the mortgages. And that was what enabled this company, Homeowner Assistance Services, to then commence the process of initiating short sale negotiations. And so what we've seen is that by basically circumventing our clients, communicating directly with the banks, the scam outfit was able to negotiate short sales of all of these properties for incredibly low prices comparatively with the debts on the property or with the value of the property. What they would do is they'd engage in this short sale negotiation unbeknownst to our clients, and then months later, after our clients would give them all kinds of documents thinking that they were helping the process of saving their homes and reestablishing the mortgage, and then they would say, oh, sorry, actually, we're not going to be able to reestablish the mortgage. We're not going to be able to refinance the debt. So what we're going to do is just a little short sale. It's just going to be on paper. It's not for real. It's just part of the process. And they would basically trick our clients into signing papers associated with a short sale. How this would play out is that for many of our clients, they would actually chauffeur them to their offices. They'd show up in a room. They'd walk into a conference room and be introduced to somebody who would say, oh, hi, I'm going to be your lawyer for today, a person who our clients would have never met before, never paid any money, never had a private conversation with them. And then they would sit down, and this lawyer, supposedly representing our clients, but of course, really being an agent for the scammer, would start passing them paperwork to sign. And when it was all over, having been told, oh, this is part of the process, our clients would have walked out of there having signed over the deeds to their properties unknowingly. And so they would go home and think, oh, great, now I've moved the process along. I've saved my home, and now I will live happily ever after. And instead what would happen is sometimes even the same day as these closings, they would get visits from people saying, hi, we want to take a look at the property we just bought. We're the new owners. And generally it would be, it would be the principals of this outfit. They'd knock on the door. They'd insist on getting access to inside the house. And of course, this is very upsetting to our clients who had no reason to think that they had signed over the deed to their property. So one of the things
Hi, Jennifer.
Oh, yeah, sure.
We have a couple of questions here, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So one of them is, are the banks aware of these scammers? And if not, can they obtain the list of names, maybe from us or some other means?
That's a great question. So I would love to say that, yes, all of the banks are aware that these scammers are out there and operating, and they've all got their, their antenna up. That's not the case. I would not assume that all banks are equally knowledgeable. However, that said, a number of banks have turned over significant amounts of documents to federal law enforcement authorities in connection with the case I was just talking about with launch development and homeowner assistance services. And so what that means is that federal law enforcement already subpoenaed their bank records relating to a number of loan transactions or short sale transactions. And so those banks are on notice, and we don't know how many banks that is, but we can say for sure, it's Wells Fargo, I think Bank of America, a number of the banks. So I think I would never assume that everybody in the bank is aware of that, but it's not like we are the only ones who know that there are these scams out there.
Thank you, Jennifer. And it doesn't hurt to address it if you are talking to a servicer. If this is actually a scam and you're aware that it is. The other question is, were any of the lenders involved in HAS, are they, let me see here, are they nationally recognized lenders?
Yes, of course. I think we have a couple of Wells Fargo a couple of Wells Fargo loans. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what the other banks were, but yes, these were not people who had loans from, kind of mom and pop lenders just in their neighborhood. I don't know if that answers the question or not. If it doesn't, I'm happy to.
That's clear. The other question we have is, what is the bank's responsibility for this behavior?
Well, that's a good question too, because we have struggled with that in the sense that, we have clients whose confidentiality is being breached unbeknownst to them, and the banks are, happily off negotiating behind the borrower's back. And, we'd like for them to be a little bit more solicitous of our clients in the sense that, if they've gotten third-party authorization, in an ideal world, they would verify that by calling our clients and having a direct conversation, because what we found is that a lot of times, a phony signature gets put on a third-party authorization form, and, basically all of us as advocates have been forced to fill out those forms, and release forms in one form or another to communicate with lenders, and then there's no real follow-up except just a letter that goes out to the homeowner that says, so-and-so has been given authorization. And for most of our clients, they're scared to open their mail. And at the point when they've decided to work with these scammers and trust them, it may well be a point when they're especially unlikely to open their mail because they're hoping, okay, well, this has all been dealt with. They're dealing with the bank now. I don't need to, open up my mail anymore. So in an ideal world, we would have the banks communicating directly, verbally with our clients to make sure that they know what they're getting into. But, I'm sure that the banks would resist that and say that, this is far beyond their responsibility to borrowers.
Right, which makes it harder for us.
Exactly.
Another question that we have is, this is an interesting one. So in terms of targeting the elderly, wouldn't this be a form of elder abuse?
Absolutely. We see it that way. I mean, we see it as a civil rights issue, and it's absolutely the case that this is, when you're targeting older people and you're targeting people who are limited proficient and you're targeting people in immigrant communities who are living in fairly secluded immigrant communities, yeah, all of those things I think are true. And to the extent possible in our cases, we've tried to raise that. I think for all of you as advocates, it is really important to keep in mind that when you're getting these older clients coming through the door, when you're getting people who present with one or more factors that might make them attractive to scammers, that you really, really do want to go over with them exactly what's been happening up until the moment they've sought your help. Because a lot of times, homeowners have had a lot of interactions with a lot of other outfits and entities and agents and brokers and, you know, and fraudsters before they are fortunate enough to come through our doors.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's all for now.
Okay. So this leads nicely into the next kind of section that we have, which is what are some of the tips from what we've learned for you all in addressing scams, and how do you kind of figure it out? Because, you know, sometimes people are going to come through the door and they're going to say, I feel like I got scammed. This is something that happened. It feels something is fishy. It doesn't smell right. And great. I mean, if somebody comes through the door and they feel like they were scammed, then that obviously makes it easier because your antenna are already up. But a lot of times people are not going to realize that they were scammed until you start, you know, looking under the hood, so to speak. So as I was starting to say before, the number one thing you want to look at is what is your client's background. And so not just the demographic factors that I already mentioned, although those are incredibly important, but also you want to look at whether the client who's come through the door is coming through on their own. Are they coming in accompanied with family members? Are they living in an isolated environment, or do they have people living upstairs or next door or down the road or across the street? Reason being that lots of these scammers target physically. In other words, they're on your client's block, they're on their street, they're on their road, they're looking at the houses. And if they can see that a client's got a steady, maybe it's an 85-year-old homeowner, but she's got, you know, 3 middle-aged sons who are constantly flowing through the house, they might be less likely to scam. On the other hand, if they're seeing an older woman living alone and not too many family members coming by, then they might say, this looks like a great opportunity. So it's really important to not just look at what the demographic factors are, but also kind of what a person's life situation is. You know, I think obviously there are other areas of vulnerability, and that's something that you're kind of going to trust your own expertise as advocates in looking at, you know, if a person, I can't even exactly hypothesize because it's such a case-by-case basis, but what you really want to do is just take stock of who your client is and think about whether they are presenting or their property is presenting in a way that might be especially attractive to, you know, to a scammer. You know, going along with this, the solicitation issue is really important. You know, you saw slides that are showing you kind of like what do scam notices look like, what do the phony flyers look like, and they are alarmingly similar to official court notices and foreclosure papers and default notices from the bank, scarily similar. And even for us as advocates, sometimes it takes a few minutes of reading before we say, oh, no, that's a scam, that is not legitimate. And so you really want to talk to your client about, you know, what have you been getting in the mail? Have you responded to anything in the mail? Have you torn off any notices and mailed them back? Have you signed any paperwork? What was it that you responded to? Because they may think that they responded to something official from the court, when in actuality they responded to, you know, a solicitation notice from a scam outfit. And they won't know that until somebody actually tries to take advantage of them in some way. You definitely want to ask your clients about whether they've gotten visits at their home. That is prime scam behavior, because a legitimate real estate broker, you know, a legitimate housing counselor, legal services provider, they're not just randomly knocking on doors. And they're certainly not knocking on doors and saying, hi, I'm going to help you fix everything. That's not what we do. That none of us would do that without some pre-existing relationship in place. you know, the other thing, and I'm not sure how prevalent this is outside of New York City, but it has definitely been the case for our cases here at Legal Services, is we've seen a lot of kind of ethnic targeting, like we would call it, you know, affinity marketing, but basically Guyanese clients getting calls from Guyanese sales agents and kind of using that moment of familiarity to break down the barriers of skepticism that our clients might otherwise feel when getting cold called at home. I personally have had more than one client say to me, like, yeah, I got a million calls, and then this woman called and I picked up, and she sounded just like, you know, somebody from the island, and you know, they kind of had that moment of recognition of, oh, are you Guyanese? Oh yeah, where are you from? And something that could feel totally innocent and friendly to your client was actually really part of a sinister, calculated plot to ferret out those clients who would be looking for someone to trust. So you really want to see, like, does your client identify as part of a, you know, as part of an ethnic or racial community, or you know, has a particular language that is not English? Those are things you want to look at to say, okay, well, are they getting targeted? The next thing that we've seen is, and something you want to focus on, is when you're talking about who approached your client and under what circumstances, you also want to find out very specifically, what was this person offering to do for your client? Reason being that, you know, your client, you have to know kind of like what the end game was for the scammer. Like, were they trying to just squeeze money out of your client by getting them to pay some upfront fees for a phony loan mod, or were they actually trying to steal your client's house out from under them? And those are two different things. They're two different kinds of scams, and you know, each one is a scam, but it's going to color the kind of advice you might give or the places you might send your client for help, and it's also going to affect the kind of research you want to do for your clients as well. So ask them, you know, were you promised a loan mod? If so, what kind of documents did they ask you for, and what kind of documents did you actually give them? Did anybody promise you that you could stay in your home no matter what? Were you promised that you could stay in your home and sign over the property, but in the end you'd be able to buy it back once your credit was fixed? And find out, get specifics. This is a great time to kind of make sure you're getting really specific information, like what was told to your client? What were they thinking this transaction was all about? What were they hoping to get out of it? You definitely want to ask your client if anybody promised them money. And if so, why were they getting money? In our cases with launch development and homeowner assistance services, nobody promised them money. But hilariously, or not hilariously, but kind of interestingly, when we reviewed the HUD-1 statements that accompanied the closing documents, we saw that consistently relocation assistance was included on the HUD-1, and almost always it was $3,000. So, and our clients never saw that money, but it was something that was always listed, and so we've been kind of on the alert, like, are they going to say, now that we've sued these people, oh, well, your client got $3,000. So you really want to find out, like, what were the promises, what were the terms, what did your client think was happening? At intake, you know, it's really important to figure out at what moment you're coming into this process. So as I had said before, we got a lot of our launch development cases we got when people were getting sued for eviction, or before they were actually facing an eviction case, the kind of the kind of self-help tactics of these owners kind of banging on the property saying, oh, let us in, you got to move out, you should move out within 30 days, or you got to start paying us rent. So you want to find out, like, what's happening. Are they still in their house, or are they not in their house? If they're not in their house, why aren't they in their house? And who got them out, and under what circumstances? You want to find out whose name is on the deed right now, and that's a quick and easy thing. You know, we had a client walk into our office, and he didn't even know that his name was no longer on the deed until we looked it up in ECRIS and saw, oh my God, you are no longer the owner of your property. And many times you will have clients who did not realize that they had been divested of ownership of their own home. So, which can be hard to swallow when you are in fact still living there. And then obviously you want to know, are they being harassed? Because particularly with our more vulnerable clients, this is really, really scary and intimidating for them. So you want to know who's harassing, how are they harassing, is it phone calls, is it visits? Because all of this is going to go towards with an eye towards building a case against these people, and hopefully undoing whatever shady transaction that had occurred. As a general matter, we do this in our office, and we try to really encourage all of our advocates to do this. Like, you want to just talk about scams with all of your clients. And this is something that I just will always broach generally with every new client that I get is I'll say, hey, are you getting a lot of phone calls? Are you getting mailings? So just be on the alert for scams and kind of put it out there early in the conversation, even if you think your client hasn't been scammed in any way, if you had no reason to be suspicious or worried that something bad has happened yet, because you may be working with your clients for quite some time, and you can't control every phone call they make. You can't control everybody who calls their house. You can't control every piece of mail that crosses their doorstep, and you want to make sure that they feel empowered to assess their own mail and their own phone calls and what's happening, and you know, to be looking at everything with a suspicious eye. So it's really good if you can just kind of put out there, listen, there's a legitimate way to deal with your loan issues, and then there's all the scams out there. So steer clear of the scams and make yourself available to look at mailings and to talk about possible solicitations, because I think we could avoid a lot more of these if people felt like they could call up a housing counselor, call a legal services office, and ask, hey, is this legit? This person's saying they can do X or Y. What do you think? The other thing is obviously that because a foreclosure case is public, you have to give people the heads up that they will be definitely targeted for all kinds of scams. I think pretty much everyone in our unit says some variation of, if the promises that somebody is making to you sound too good to be true, they definitely are. Because as we all know from doing this the hard way, it is really tough to get out of foreclosure. No matter what path you're taking out of it, it is a process. And if somebody's saying, oh, it's so easy, just sign here, or just, you know, I'll give you this amount of money, it'll all be wrapped up in a matter of months or weeks. If a person is making that kind of promise, they're either completely incompetent or they are completely dishonest, and probably they're both. The other, like, really, really, really big area of inquiry for new clients is you really want to find out if they are currently working with anybody, with any other organization, or if they've worked with any other organization in the past to get any type of help with their loan. And as part of that, you want to find out, did they pay any money? This is where anybody who has, you know, who likes doing a little Google stalking, this is the place to do it, because if you get some names from your client, you can just sit there right at the computer with them and just Google these people. And you can look in public records and find out, have these people been sued before? Are they registered with the Department of State as corporations or as LLCs? You can go into AG Scam Help and check to see if they are, a recommended provider. All of these places, like, these are quick searches that you can do with your client even sitting right there, and it'll give you a quick answer because you will know. If they're saying they had worked with X or Y organization and they're turning up somewhere online and they're either not recommended or they've been sued, then that's a pretty good indicator that this person may have fallen victim to a scam, and you're going to want to dig deeper into what's happening with their property. So in terms of what we would hope in the ideal world, what would we hope as advocates for best practices when our client is looking to sell their home? What you really don't want to have happen is that your client is trying to do this kind of deal informally. That's not how you should be selling your home under any circumstances, no matter how stressed you are about a foreclosure, no matter how in the hole you are. It's just never the way to divest yourself of your property. So you want to make sure that your clients are connecting with the Center for New York City Neighborhoods Housing Mobility Program. They have a list of brokers who are legitimate brokers, and so that's a really great place to start. It's also a great idea to suggest that your client consult with an independent attorney. Basically, there's never a situation where somebody says, here's a lawyer that we got for you, that you should trust that situation, because attorneys have ethical obligations, and number one is to develop an attorney-client relationship, and you can't have that kind of relationship if you walk into a room and you say, hi, I'm your lawyer, and you proceed to hand documents to a person. And then finally, in terms of best practices for selling your home, it's really important that you make sure, if your client's trying to sell their property, that they find out what the home value really is and have a broker draft a listing agreement so that, they're not just going off what they found online or what some agent told them in a door-to-door, in a face-to-face conversation. There's a legitimate way to do that. As far as other things to look for in the home selling arena, you want to really encourage your clients to not say, oh, I prefer a cash offer to a financed offer. A lot of our clients, understandably, are like, cash in hand, this person has the money right here. But, the risk of that is that they're going to get less than what the home is worth. And in many situations, a financed offer may also represent a legitimate purchaser as opposed to, a developer or somebody who's a little bit shadier who, why do they have all that cash in hand? It's not to impugn every single cash offer, but it's just to say that there should not be kind of an automatic preference for one over the other. It's also really, really important that any of your clients who are trying to sell their houses know who they're dealing with. Our clients, unfortunately, in many situations, at least with the homeowner assistance services cases, they did not know who was affiliated with this entity. They didn't know that the corporate alter ego that ultimately got their property was connected with homeowner assistance services. And, if they had taken the time or realized that they should be asking those questions and finding out the names and things like that, perhaps they might not have been scammed. Going along with that is obviously that our clients really need to be encouraged to read all of the documents that they are being handed in a given transaction. Every term of the sale absolutely must be written down. There shouldn't be any kind of informal sort of, oh, this is happening on paper, but really what's going to happen is X. If somebody says this is on paper only, that is a big, big red flag. And if your client comes through the door and says that their expectation was based on something verbally said but never written down, big red flag. And finally, especially if your client is doing a short sale, they really should be communicating directly with their servicer and really not delegating authority to a third party who isn't, an advocate like one of us. Aside from a legitimate advocate, they should not be giving authority to other third parties to deal with the bank. It's just always better for your clients to deal with their lenders themselves. It's really important that when you have a client who you think has been scammed, or you're not even sure, but you think there's a possibility, that aside from digging into it to the best of your own abilities, it's really important to refer them to a legal services office. And the reason that we say that is because these are really very complicated scams a lot of the time. And there are things that we as attorneys can sometimes do to, if not reverse the process immediately, at least potentially stop a scam before it gets worse, either by stopping an eviction case from going forward, or by filing a public document that would be publicly recorded so to place the world on notice that there is a problem with this property. And so we really strongly encourage you, if you see any evidence of any kind of scam, to please reach out to legal services providers in your area, because it's not going to be easy to get a private attorney to take a look at these kind of cases. It's hard to see where the money would be. They are very resource intensive for lawyers to deal with, and so a legal services agency is going to be the best kind of the most promising avenue of assistance, and they will have the time to look into this and potentially help your clients. Obviously, going along with that, something that you can do as a housing advocate is to report these scams to as many administrative agencies and law enforcement entities as you can. In addition to AG Scam Help, there are lots of other places that you can make these complaints, whether it's with the Division of Financial Services or with your local district attorney's office. The federal government has been looking into this, so there are lots of different places that that you can go. And we really encourage you, don't feel like because you made a complaint on AG Scam Help then that, oh, well, you can't make any other complaints, because the scammers are violating all kinds of laws and regulations, and so you might as well hold them as accountable as possible. And a lot of these complaints don't require that much from you, and so you can do them relatively easily with your client sitting there. So the last thing is kind of what we can do to fight back as advocates. And like I was saying, so administrative complaints, what they look like is a lot of times you're going to be either filing something online or making a phone call or writing a letter. And the truth is, okay, just doing that alone may not reverse the scam, but all different areas of both law enforcement and administrative regulation, they are looking at these scams now. As Dina Levy already said, the AG's office is very interested in this. As I mentioned, the federal government is interested in this. I mean, in New York City, some of the people involved in homeowner assistance services have actually been arrested by the FBI, and they're charged with a criminal case. So there is a lot of interest in this issue right now, and you are entirely within your zone of competence as housing advocates to make these complaints. So we really encourage you to do that. For us as attorneys, we're doing our best to develop litigation around these scams. there's lots and lots of different kinds of claims that can be made. Lawsuits are obviously a heavy lift, and so we try to make sure that we have solid claims before we file them. But there are a lot of statutes, and New York State has tried to be somewhat protective of vulnerable homeowners, and so there are certain statutes like the Home Equity Theft Prevention Act and the Distressed Property Consultants Act. These are statutes that were specifically passed by the legislature to address the vulnerabilities that our clients face and figure out ways of counteracting the scams that are proliferating. So there's lots of different kinds of claims that can be raised, and also there are criminal penalties that can attach to a lot of the activity that goes on as part of a deed theft scam or a mortgage assistance scam. A rescission notice is a very quick kind of thing that can be filed by an attorney with in the public register, and it just kind of says, I rescind this transaction. And as I said, I mean, criminal complaints, you can call up your local DAs. You may have some really interested DAs, particularly outside of the city where their case volume is lower. So we encourage you to do any and all of these things to help your clients.
Hi, Jennifer. Sorry to interrupt. We actually have 5 more minutes before the webinar is supposed to end. So if you wouldn't mind just speeding things up a little bit, and what we'll do is we'll just make sure that people type in the questions as we go along, and if we can't answer them on this webinar, then we will certainly take all those questions and type them up and then type in the answers as well so that everyone can see when we send it out later on. Okay, sorry about that.
No, totally fine. And I think we've already covered just how prevalent these scams are. So I would turn it over to Rosemary at this point.
Okay. Hi. Okay. I've just been asked to talk for a few minutes about what we're seeing outside of New York City. I know that you always hear a lot about what's going on in the city, but unfortunately these scams are everywhere from Long Island to Rochester. Real quick, a few things for those on the line, not from New York City. We don't have the plus of being able to go on ACRIS and look up to see whether or not our clients have had any issues with their property. So your clients are actually going to have to go down to the county clerk's offices and look it up on the computers down there. What they don't need to do is pay $1,000 to someone who promises to get them a certified copy of the deed, which is something that we see a lot of people receiving those mailings right now. We're finding that attorneys are seeming to be the newest breed of scammer, at least in Long Island for the most part, that because people trust an attorney, they feel like this is a professional person, they must know what they're talking about, they wouldn't scam me, that is a big source right now. And just quickly, they asked me to talk about some of the cases that we have going. So we right now have 4 litigations filed against the Donato Law Firm and American HOPP. They are, and a lot of what my colleagues talked about you're going to see here, they target the Hispanic communities. They put advertisements in the Spanish newspapers in Spanish. They do mailings. They knock on doors. They bring people, they come to the house. They automatically realize that they're from the same country. They start talking. They gain that trust. All the negotiations are in Spanish. Everything they talk about is in Spanish. But when it comes time to sign the legal documentation, it is all in English. And they gave the clients a general overview of supposedly what was in the documents, but they never gave any of the details. They charged $2,850 for a forensic loan audit, which in 3 out of the 4 cases was never even done. And then they charge $695 a month, which is ACH'd out of the client's account. Like what we were talking about before, the American HOPP Group, which is a quote modification company, is associated with an attorney, Donato, and they use that as their excuse why they should be able to charge upfront fees. Of course, the argument is that if an attorney is going to charge fees, an attorney actually has to have some connection and do some of the work. And in this case, and in a lot of the cases we see with other law firms, that's not the case. They are what I call rent a license, which is basically you do all the work, put my name on it, and send me a check for every case that you close. or percentage of the money that you make. Some of the other red flags here, 3 of the 4 clients were told to stop paying their mortgage, including one who was already in a HAMP 1 modification. So already had, when he went to them, the best possible modification he could get. The hook that they have, and this is a red flag, is when someone says, I'm going to lower the amount you owe on your house to the equivalent of what your house is now worth. So you owe $400,000, but your house is now worth $250,000. So we are going to make the bank change your mortgage completely and bring you down to a $250,000 balance, which we know is not the way that things work. So those are what we have going on right now. We're seeing, I can speak for Long Island, and we also see some Westchester clients, a really big uptake in the scammers coming in to all neighborhoods, all levels. I have clients that have master's degrees, and I have clients who have high school diplomas. And when someone is desperate and someone is at the point where they feel like they're going to lose their home because now they're so far into the foreclosure process, and they've heard a lot of legitimate people say to them, this is not going to work. Unfortunately, that's when these scammers, they come. They look for the people who haven't paid in a very long time. So we just want to, I find that the housing counselors tend to be my eyes and ears on the ground. They're usually the people that first touch a lot of these people and can form that relationship. A lot of people are very embarrassed to say they were scammed, even if they, in their mind now, have come to the conclusion that they think they were taken advantage of. No one wants to tell somebody, yes, this person took advantage of me for $10,000. This person took advantage of me for $20,000. This person had me sign something saying that, if they could save me this much money on my mortgage, that I would give them a second mortgage in that amount on my house. Because now, as they've seen it unfold, they realize that this was a problem. So, the housing counselors a lot of times have that relationship, and by asking the questions, then they're able to guide people over into the right areas. I don't want to scare everybody into thinking that every attorney and every real estate broker is a scammer, because that's not the case. There are some very good legitimate out there, obviously. There are some people who are not necessarily scammers, but just don't know what they're doing. And that's we have to decipher, and that's what we have to figure out. So that's my quick 5-minute synopsis.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. I'm sorry you had to speed things up a little bit. So for those of you who need to go somewhere else, we'll definitely be mailing these out and posting it on the Center's listserv as well as our portal and Empire Justice Center's portal. But for those of you who do have time, we'll be answering some of these questions here. And then for the rest of you who have to go, I can just send a copy of any useful information that we get from these questions. All right, so for the first question that we have here, does being a victim of either type of scam offers any potential defenses to a foreclosure action?
This is Jenny. I'm trying to think about whether, I don't think that we have used a person's victimhood yet as a defense in a foreclosure, generally because we're getting people after the foreclosures have been have been wrapped up, because generally the scams are coming in as a way of kind of like tying up the foreclosure, generally with a fraudulent short sale. It's not to say that it couldn't be used as a defense, but we haven't done it yet.
And if I can add, it is important that these clients speak to an attorney, because in some cases, unwittingly, these clients have done things that could get them into trouble. So we never want a client to admit something that in such a way that we would be worried that they could get themselves into trouble. So I think it's really important that they have an attorney to work through those things with. If they're going to start putting claims into the foreclosure papers and things like that, we always like to make sure that we craft them in such a way that it will cause the least problems for the homeowner.
Great, thank you, Rosemary. And the other question that we have, actually that person has left, so we'll just leave it offline. It's just basically ethical consideration of when they're being represented by an attorney that who may be a scammer? How do you deal with that?
We see that quite a bit. A lot of the people who come in, the scammer has put in a notice of appearance because maybe they put in some kind of answer, and then they have either disappeared or they're charging all this money and they're not doing anything. A client has the right to fire their attorney. Now, we can't give a lot of specific advice, and we have to be very careful, but we can't obviously delve into a case unless that attorney is off the case. But a client, does have the right to fire an attorney, and in a lot of cases, we can talk in generalities to people about what's going on and what red flags are and things like that, and then if the person comes to that conclusion, then they need to sever that relationship.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Now, the last question is actually coming from my office here. In terms of the door-knocking solicitation, do you guys see this as more of a widespread thing that a lot of the different parties are using, the scammers, or is it just more targeted with certain outfits doing it? I'm not sure if you guys have data on that or what the frequency is like.
I mean, it seems like solicitation is a pretty widespread issue. Like, not just the scammers that we've seen and identified as scammers per se, but it kind of feels like our clients get put in foreclosure and the flood begins. So, and it may be different upstate where it isn't such a kind of hot property market. My guess is that it does vary a bit based on the particular real estate terrain that you're in. But that aggressive solicitation we pretty much see with almost every client, regardless of whether they have actually been scammed.
Yeah, I mean, there are companies and individuals that, their job is they're hired to go down to the county clerk's offices and find everyone who's been put into foreclosure. In Long Island, we have a hard problem with the tax liens. We have a lot of people who may not have mortgages on their properties, but because people's taxes can be anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 a year, a lot of people get into trouble on tax liens. So investors, as they call themselves, know that those people are in trouble and that those people need a quick fix because those don't last 5 years in the courts. So we see people that are getting taken advantage of by being given, this is a quick cash offer, we can take care of this. So it's really important to keep an eye out on those things as well. We don't see a lot of door knocking.
Yeah.
A lot of churches, community centers, elder centers, those are the places where they get people to trust them, right? I'm a member of your congregation, I would never rob you. I'm a member of your community center, I would never rob you. It's the same exact story because a lot of these are the same exact people that were the mortgage brokers that caused the problem in the beginning.
Thank you, Rosemary, and I think that just highlights the importance of doing this community outreach and educating our communities about who these players are and how they approach people. So that's it. Thank you, everyone who stayed over, and sorry that we ran a little bit late, but I hope everyone learned a bit about this, about the scam crisis. In terms of the materials, it's actually in the handout here, and I think Empire Justice may be mailing it out or putting it in their portal. So that's it for me. Michelle, do you have any other instructions?
Nope, just a reminder to please complete the webinar evaluation. We do look at those and we do forward it on to our funders, so your comments and suggestions are very helpful.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.